In the heart of a ruined city, storms raged like they had been summoned to finish what corruption had begun. The city groaned like a wounded giant. Towers stood half-collapsed. Streets cracked with weeds. Air choked with fumes from illegal plants that never stopped burning. Here, destruction was not an accident, it was an industry. Gangs ruled the alleys. Poisons bled into the rivers, and every soul that still lived there breathed despair. Yet in the chaos, one man waded into the flood, not with power or wealth, but with faith. They called him Bill, but to those who knew him best, he was the rebuilder. His mission was not survival for himself, but restoration for all. This is their story. Welcome, friends, to Heritage TV Modern Scrolls, where the timeless faith of Scripture is retold as living cinematic stories for our world today. I'm so glad you've joined today's journey. Before we continue this journey, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from? Let me know in the comments, because it fills my heart to see how far these modern scrolls are reaching. And as you watch, if this story speaks to your heart, and if you believe stories like this can inspire hope and faith in our broken world, I invite you to hit the subscribe button, like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Now let us step into the ruins, where Bill's courage and God's hand rebuild a city that darkness thought it owned forever. The city groaned like a wounded beast. Towers lay cracked and abandoned. Streets crumbled into dust. Rivers ran black with industrial waste. What once was a thriving home had become a kingdom of shadows. Drug lords turned empty schools into distribution centers. Cartels ran their networks through alleys where children once played. Factories, unchecked, poured poison into the air. Politicians fattened themselves on despair, siphoning money from aid projects that never touched the ground. People profited from the destruction. Bill arrived quietly, without banners, without entourage. He did not stand on podiums. He walked the ruins by night, notebook in hand, documenting everything. Broken hospitals, polluted water lines, neighborhoods where families slept on concrete, mapping devastation with the eyes of an architect and the heart of a prophet. He spoke little. He listened much. He noted who was feeding on the decay. Cartels that sold drugs under the banner of community outreach. Industrialists who disguised pollution as progress. Politicians who thrived on chaos because order would expose them. Every ruin had an owner. Every wound had a beneficiary. That's when Bill understood. To rebuild this city was to dismantle their kingdom. Rebuilding wouldn't threaten the rubble. It would threaten the rulers of rubble. And that was why they would never let him build easily. And in those midnight walks, one truth burned. The city was not just broken. It was stolen. In the heart of this broken city, bulldozers roared, trucks hauled debris. Heavy machinery growled, workers labored under the unforgiving sun, and the ground trembled with the pounding of steel on concrete. A wall was rising, not of stone, but of reinforced steel and concrete, a barrier of protection, a line between despair and renewal. Architects unrolled plans. A new foundation was being laid, a city reborn from ash. But every sound of progress struck fear into the hearts of those who thrived on chaos. Drug empires ran their networks through these ruins. Smugglers hid in abandoned factories. Corrupt politicians siphoned millions from the poverty of the people. At every corner, enemies waited. Journalists with sharpened headlines. Rivals with hidden funds and darker agendas. Politicians who wanted failure. It was not just a wall, it was a testimony. A testimony that faith, though buried under years of ruin, could still stand. At the center of it all was Bill, not with sword or crown. Not a mayor, not a billionaire, but a man of vision, carrying nothing but faith, a plan, and relentless courage. His hands bore the marks of endless labor. His eyes carried sleepless nights, but his heart beat with a fire that nothing on earth could quench. Even now, as machines roared and laborers lifted steel beams skyward, shadows moved against them. A convoy of black SUVs slowed at the perimeter. Men stepped out, rivals, emissaries of doubt, whispering bribes, plotting sabotage. The work was already under siege. Bill had not begun here. He had left a life of comfort far away. From the comfort of a corporate tower where the skyline was his ceiling and influence was currency. A place where he managed skyscrapers and multi-million-dollar projects. Yet when he heard of the fallen state of his homeland, at first he dismissed it as another news cycle. But one night, scrolling through footage of riots and ruins, he saw his childhood street, his mother's church burned to the ground. Families broken, children growing up in ruins, inhaling toxins as they played, schools turned to drug dens, hospitals overrun with addicts. families fleeing with no hope, a city stripped of its dignity. That image seared his soul. He could not remain in his comfort. He closed his laptop and whispered, "Lord, let me go home." It wasn't nostalgia. It was calling. He traded boardrooms for rubble, strategy charts for survival plans, power suits for dust-stained jackets. When Bill arrived, the ruins nearly swallowed him. Broken glass crunched under his boots. Gunshots echoed in alleys. The stench of waste and smoke clung to the air. This was not just a place forgotten. It was a place stolen. The city is toxic, abandoned, controlled by gangs, polluted by illegal refineries, and riddled with drugs. Bill sees not just ruins, but systems, factories pouring poison, cartel trucks moving freely, children playing in sewage. He realizes the city is not merely broken, but actively exploited. But amid the despair, he saw something else. Children sketching homes in the dirt, mothers whispering prayers in crumbled doorways, elders remembering songs of a city that once thrived. Instead of despairing, he surveys at night, walking, taking notes, quietly mapping strongholds of corruption. He builds a survival plan, restore, not relocate, not only for walls and roads, but for hearts and governance. He called them, "Let us rise, rebuild." They had no money, no influence, no safety, but they had faith, and faith was the first cornerstone. At dawn he called them, not leaders, not officials, but the forgotten, the ordinary people, ex-teachers, street sweepers, mothers, students, retired nurses, ex-convicts, youths. At first they are skeptical. They have seen leaders come and go, each profiting off despair. The people themselves have grown numb and hopeless. They gathered in the shadow of a collapsed market. Their eyes were weary, their bodies thin, their hope buried. For years they had been used and abandoned. Politicians promised change, then vanished. Corporations promised jobs, then poisoned their land. They expected the same from him. But Bill did not promise riches. He did not offer miracles. He shares his own resources. He rolled up his sleeves, lifted bricks with his own hands, and ate the same food they ate, scraps cooked over open fires. He slept where they slept, under leaking roofs. His solidarity convinces them that this vision is not politics, but survival. Slowly, suspicion melted into trust. They pick up shovels and hammers. One by one, they joined him. Teachers reopened classrooms. Volunteers cleared debris. A clinic patched the first wounded child. Faith became contagious. Progress stirred enemies. The moment restoration began. Old roads cleared, trash hauled, school roofs replaced. Immediately, opposition roared. They thought the first opposition would come from poverty, from scarcity, exhaustion, lack of funding. But Bill learned quickly. Poverty was not the enemy. Prosperity and corruption was. Hidden behind tinted windows, high-rise offices, and expensive suits were those who had profited from the ruins. The collapse had become their currency. The chaos had given them control. Drugs moved easier through broken streets. Black markets thrived in unguarded alleys. Influence was cheap when people were desperate. And so, when word spread that Bill planned to rebuild the city, to restore the walls, clean the water, and bring order back, panic rippled through the shadows like a warning shot. They called themselves the Board, a mix of politicians, industrialists, and self-made dealers. To the public, they were philanthropists. To the streets, they were the silent architects of decay. They had bought what was broken, and they would fight to keep it broken. Their first strike was subtle, influence. They whispered through the city's veins, "Who is this man, Bill? Who sent him? What does he really want?" They turned the workers' hope into suspicion. Rumors became bricks of division. The rebuilders began to question their own foundation. The first walls that cracked weren't made of stone. They were made of trust, and Bill felt it. The murmurs, the glances, the doubt. He'd seen this before, how lies can spread faster than cement can set. But he didn't fight back with anger. He fought back with truth and transparency. Every evening, he stood before the workers and opened the plans for all to see. "This city isn't mine," he said. "It's ours, and the one who sent us to build watches every hand that lifts a stone." The murmurs began to fade, not because the lies stopped, but because faith had found its footing again. Have you ever faced that kind of opposition, where people twist your purpose, question your integrity, or try to dim what God lit inside you? They can't stop what God starts. If you've ever had to keep building while being misunderstood, no weapon formed against you shall prosper. Isaiah 54:17. When lies failed, sabotage came next. Trucks arrived with tainted materials. Contracts were forged. Permits went missing. Every setback felt like a curse. Every step forward came with a new delay. The board's plan was simple. Drain Bill's strength, waste his funds, make him look incompetent until even the faithful abandoned him. And for a while, it almost worked. Bill sits alone in a small office, papers scattered, his phone ringing endlessly. He ignores it, staring instead at a small, framed verse on the wall. Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Psalm 127, verse 1. He closes his eyes, whispers a prayer. If you called me to build, Lord, teach me to outlast those who wish to see me fall. That night, something shifted. Not outside, but within. He realized rebuilding a city meant also rebuilding endurance. That faith wasn't the absence of fatigue, but the refusal to quit. He gathered the workers again, not with slogans, but with sincerity. They profit from our pain, he said. They build wealth from our wounds. But we will build something they cannot steal, peace. And the people answered not with applause, but with action. One by one, they returned to the work. Brick by brick, breath by breath. Workers purify water with new filters. Local youths repaint buildings. Street preachers hand out food. The polluted stream begins to clear. The board's panic deepened. For every scheme they launched, the rebuilders found a way to adapt. They turned scarcity into innovation, corruption into prayer, opposition into opportunity. The very thing meant to poison them became a platform for testimony. Family, have you noticed? Every time the enemy sends resistance, it's really a test to see whether your faith will break or break through. What if every obstacle in your life is a disguised promotion? Those who feed on the ruins will always fear those who rebuild them. The city was far from finished, but hope had a heartbeat again. The opposition hadn't disappeared. It had only been unmasked. They still lurked, planning, tightening the noose around the city's economy. But Bill no longer feared them. He understood something now. You can't threaten a man who's already surrendered everything to God. One morning, as trucks brought cement and steel, armed gangs blocked the road. Drivers were beaten, materials stolen. That same week, corrupt officials arrived in sleek cars, with polished shoes and smug smiles, holding injunction papers, waving legal threats, declaring the city unsalvageable, claiming, "The land is toxic and unfit for rebuilding." Rumors spread in the city. Bill is a fraud. He will use you and leave you like the rest. Cartel messengers whispered offers of bribes to abandon the project. Industrial owners whose toxic plants poured poison into the soil spread propaganda. This rebuilding is a scam, a trap, it will fail. But Bill was ready. Instead of fighting the gangs with guns, he fought with light. He lifted the work into the open. He streamed videos of children studying in half-lit classrooms, of mothers repairing homes with bare hands, of fathers pulling weeds from roads that had been buried for years. The world saw. Donations trickled in. Volunteers from nearby towns brought tools and food. The people themselves become the witnesses, making corruption harder to hide. Every lie was drowned by the truth of their labor. If God has called you to rebuild, whether it's your family, your faith, or your purpose, expect opposition. But remember this: those who profit from chaos will always fight order, and those who walk with God will always outlast them. Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Nehemiah 4:14. But truth has enemies. The city began to take shape, but so did the fury of enemies. One midnight, under the harsh glare of floodlights, workers hammered steel into place. Suddenly shouts tore the air. Masked men stormed the site. Firebombs exploded, scaffolds burned, and panic swallowed the night. Workers scattered. Supplies were stolen. Fear gripped the heart of the people. Bill did not run. He knew it was a direct violent sabotage, funded by cartels and corrupt leaders. He lifted a broken steel rod, held it like a weapon, and stood until the attackers fled. The fire lit his silhouette like a warrior of old. He walked straight into the smoke, face covered with a soaked cloth, directing buckets, calming chaos. He didn't shout threats. He shouted hope. "Hold the line! This is our city." When dawn came, the plaza was still standing, charred but intact. The workers gathered around him, exhausted, ashamed they had almost quit. And he said softly, "Courage isn't the absence of fire. It's the decision to build while it burns." The next day, he changed the strategy. He organizes survival defense. He divides the people, half to build, half to guard with helmets. Security cameras, makeshift barricades, volunteers patrolling with whistle sticks. and radios. Work continues under watch. Fear is turned into vigilance. Children carried water and food to their fathers. Women patched wounds and cleared debris. The rebuilding became survival. Faith became armor. Friend, can I ask you something? What's burning around you right now? Is it your family, your finances, your faith? The enemy doesn't always attack with swords. Sometimes it's rumors, distractions, despair. But hear this. The presence of fire doesn't mean the plan has failed. It means you're building something worth attacking. So, breathe. Wipe the ashes off your hands. Keep laying bricks. As the smoke cleared and the city whispered rumors of this fearless rebuilder, new threats began to form. Not from outsiders, but from within. Some who once called him brother would soon call him enemy, and Bill would learn that rebuilding walls was easier than rebuilding trust. The enemies could not break them from outside, so they crept within. Betrayal rarely begins with hatred. It begins with hunger. The hunger to be seen, to be secure, to be free from struggle. And that's how the breach began, not in the wall, but in a heart. His name was Jarek, Bill's closest coordinator, the man who managed supplies and manpower. They had grown up in the same dusty town, shared dreams, shared prayers, shared nights, counting every coin for the first foundation stones. Bill trusted him completely. But the enemy had been studying him too. They offered him what he'd been praying for: money for treatment, a way out of debt, a guarantee that his family would be safe. All he had to do was send copies of the project plans. Nothing visible, nothing dramatic, just information. The enemy never asks for much, just enough to fracture faith. Late night. Jarek copies files from Bill's tablet to a flash drive. The glow from the screen reflects in his trembling eyes. His hand shakes. He whispers a silent apology no one hears. The next morning, everything seemed normal. The workers sang, cement poured. But the next shipment of materials was intercepted at the docks. Permits that had been approved vanished overnight. Inspectors arrived with orders to halt construction, citing safety violations that didn't exist. It was as if the enemy had read their every step. Because they had. A trusted supplier diverted funds. Trucks of cement vanished. Plans were leaked before they began. And one night, homes under reconstruction were set ablaze. The people grew suspicious. Whispers of betrayal spread. Bill's eyes scanning through canceled orders, missing signatures, red-stamped, denied forms. A faint tremor runs through his hand as realization dawns. Bill investigated quietly. He tracked receipts, followed delivery trucks in the dead of night. What he discovered cut deep. One of their own was selling them out to rivals. The betrayal wasn't just in the logistics. It was in the silence. The quiet, heavy knowing that someone inside had opened the gates. That pain hits different, not like a wound from an enemy, but like a scar carved by a friend. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted? Someone you prayed with, worked with, believed in? Type, but I kept building if you've ever had to move forward with a heart that hurt. Even my close friend, someone I trusted who shared my bread, has turned against me. Psalm 41:9. Corruption always seeks partnership. The board alone couldn't stop the rebuild, but with government signatures and seals they could choke it legally, starve it quietly. The deputy mayor, once a vocal supporter, suddenly shifted his stance. Till environmental clearances are renewed, he said, all construction must pause. It was a public statement, a surgical strike disguised as bureaucracy. The city's heartbeat slowed again. Funding froze, machines went still. Faith wavered. The betrayal was total. From the inside, his blueprints were stolen. From above, his project was strangled. And in between, whispers spread again. Maybe God has left him. But faith isn't proven when all is well. It's proven when all is wrong. Bill didn't curse, didn't run, didn't break. He knelt. In the middle of the abandoned site, he placed his hands on the cold ground and said, Lord, if this is where you still want me, then this dust will be my altar. And that night, under the bruised sky, he stayed there, praying, alone, but not forgotten. When morning came, something miraculous happened. The people who had scattered began to return. Quietly, without announcements, without pay. One brought water, another carried cement. A young man laid down a plank and said, We start again. The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also purified the ranks. What remained were those who believed not because it was easy, but because it was holy. Family, hear me. Betrayal can break you or bless you, depending on where it drives you. If it drives you to your knees, it will not destroy you. God will always rebuild stronger what man tried to break apart. God will sometimes allow betrayal to reveal who truly belongs to the mission. Inside a modest home, Yarek watches the morning news, Bill's project restarting. His wife weeps silently beside him. On the table sits the same envelope of money he'd been given, untouched. He stands, walks out the door, and disappears into the morning haze. Conviction found him before Bill did. The same man who had leaked the plans returned to confess. Not to save his job, but to save his soul. "They used me," he said, "but they can't use me anymore." And in that moment, Bill saw what grace looks like. Not a punishment, but a second chance. In rebuilding a city, he learned something about faith. It is not just about stone and steel, but about hearts. And the hardest walls to guard are the ones inside. The city had been wounded, yes, but it was still alive, and so long as it breathed, there was purpose. Betrayal didn't end the mission. It refined it. The walls were rising again. Not just of steel and stone, but of trust rebuilt by grace. Some of you are rebuilding after betrayal, in business, in ministry, in family. Remember this, even when men fail you, God never does. And sometimes, what feels like the end is just God clearing the stage for new strength. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. Maybe you've been betrayed too. Maybe your trust was traded for convenience. But listen, God doesn't waste pain. Even the cracks of betrayal can become windows for His light. Have you ever faced betrayal that broke your spirit? Write in the comments, how did God carry you through? The world teaches revenge, but the kingdom teaches restoration. Bill knew rebuilding the city meant rebuilding trust. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Matthew 6:12. Betrayal tried to break the foundation, but forgiveness became the cornerstone. The city was beginning to breathe again. Roads once buried in trash stretched open like veins of new life. A school roof, patched with borrowed steel, gleamed under the morning sun. Children carried books again, their laughter threading through streets that had known only silence and sirens. For the first time in years, there was momentum, and then the skies broke. It began with a low growl on the horizon, a storm gathering its voice. Thunder rolled across the skyline like collapsing towers, and the rain descended not as blessing but as judgment. The half-rebuilt streets drowned again. Water rose through unfinished walls, tore through market stalls. It gushed down half-cleared streets, washing tools away, breaking scaffolds, flooding homes where families had only just returned, sweeping the fields where hope had only just taken root. By afternoon, dark clouds rolled like armies across the heavens, and by nightfall, the city was swallowed whole. Lightning tore the sky into jagged pieces. Thunder cracked through every abandoned building, and the heavens unleashed their fury. Rain fell without mercy. The air was filled with the roar of water, and the cries of those caught in it. Walls barely rebuilt crumbled back into mud. In the temporary shelters, children coughed as damp air clung to their lungs. Mothers rocked them through the night, praying over fevers with no medicine left. Pools of stagnant water became breeding grounds for disease. Food spoiled. The city that had risen one step was shoved back three. And yet Bill did not hide. When the people looked for him, they found him waist-deep in brown water, clearing blocked drains with his bare hands. His jacket was gone, given to a shivering boy. His boots were ruined, soaked through with mud. He labored beside the laborers, hauling broken planks, stacking sandbags where the water pressed hardest. His silence spoke louder than speeches. By dawn, his hands bled. His body sagged with exhaustion, but his presence was fire. Fathers who had nearly given up rose again to clear rubble. Young men formed chains, pulling families to higher ground. Mothers shared what little food remained, even as their own children went hungry. In the nights that followed, Bill organized survival like a commander of faith. Schools became shelters, classrooms became clinics. Chalkboards turned into prayer walls covered with scribbled verses and pleas. Volunteers patrolled to stop looters from exploiting the chaos. He called nearby farmers to trade food for the promise of shelter once the city was restored. Farmers from the hills sent food, their carts dragging through mud. Nurses worked by candlelight, hands trembling but steadfast. Brick by brick, the people refused to let the storm bury them. The rains lasted days, then weeks. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the storm broke. The clouds parted like curtains torn from the sky. Light spilled across the ruined city, glinting on pools of stagnant water, on the twisted scaffolds, on faces lined with exhaustion and triumph. Every sunrise brought new loss. Another house collapsed, another family displaced. But every sunrise also brought stubborn defiance. Another road cleared, another fire lit, another child carried to safety. The people emerged, shivering, coughing, hungry, but alive. They had withstood nature itself. For the first time in years, the city had survived something together. Children splashed in puddles that had once been rivers of destruction. Men and women raised broken tools like banners. Bill stood among them, drenched to the bone, and smiled through chattering teeth. The storm revealed what the enemies had hoped all along, that rebuilding would collapse under the weight of nature itself. That despair would prove stronger than faith. But the storm also revealed something else, that this city was not just being built by cement and steel, but by blood, sweat, tears, and unbroken faith. By the time the skies finally cleared, the city lay bruised, but alive. The floodwaters receded, and in their place stood a people hardened, bonded, unshaken. And Bill? He stood taller than the ruins, for storms could break walls, but not vision. But even as the storm passed, another one gathered, one without thunder or lightning, unseen, quiet, deliberate. It moved in silence, through bank halls and boardrooms, through the invisible hands that pull the strings of a city's survival. It began with whispers from the trading houses, supplies delayed. Then the markets trembled. Prices rose overnight. Cement doubled, fuel tripled. Trucks that once brought supplies sat idle at checkpoints. Banks froze accounts for review. Credit lines vanished. Donors who had once promised aid withdrew without explanation. Creditors demanded repayment on phantom debts. Families queued for bread that never came. The storm of nature had tested their bodies. The storm of greed now came for their souls. The people could rebuild against wind and water, but how do you fight numbers on a screen? Bill sensed it before the rest. The men behind the decay had grown bold. With the city's lifeline cut, they moved like shadows through the system, freezing accounts, revoking licenses, blacklisting suppliers. Every nail, every brick, every light, strangled by unseen hands. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, and rulers of the darkness of this world. Ephesians 6:12. Inside a dim boardroom, Mr. Halden and his associates, oil executives, drug distributors, a few crooked officials, sit around a glass table. City maps and red-marked zones spread before them. They had no interest in rebuilding. The ruins were profitable, a haven for the trade of addiction, pollution, and despair. As long as the city stayed broken, their empire thrived. They didn't just build industries. They built dependence, feeding on hopelessness. Bill watched as the lifeblood of progress drained away. Workers came with empty hands. Vendors demanded cash before delivery. Hunger became a visitor at every door. Children pressed against bakery windows, counting loaves they could no longer buy. It was not coincidence. The opposition had found a new weapon: scarcity. They whispered in the ears of suppliers, bribed transport companies, offered secret bonuses to those who delayed shipments. The goal was simple: choke the dream until it died quietly. Have you seen darkness profit from the pain of others? When truth rises, corruption trembles, but only if the faithful refuse to bow. Bill's engineers and builders argue in frustration. Some pack their tools, others sit, head in hands. Supplies are gone. Food is scarce. The bank won't release project funds. They no longer attacked with fire or blades. They would choke the city with hunger. Bill walks among them, silent, absorbing every sigh. This was no longer a battle of stone and steel. This was a siege of the spirit, and yet in that tightening grip, faith began to invent. The power grid fails. Darkness engulfs the city. Fires flicker in barrels as workers huddle together at night, praying, hungry, afraid. In the distance, Halden's tower glows, a mockery of wealth and control. The enemy had money. The enemy had men. But Bill had something they could neither buy nor kill. When the enemy comes in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord shall lift up a standard against him. Isaiah 59, verse 19. No speech, just motion. He begins rebuilding a small section of wall alone in the dark. Faith doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the dark, keep building. Others watch him. One by one they rise. They pick up their tools, carrying broken materials from the wreck. It's clumsy, desperate, but it's movement. Dozens of hands worked by candlelight, determination shining through exhaustion. He gathered the workers beneath the cracked dome of a government hall long abandoned. Lanterns flickered against wet walls. Raindrops still dripped through holes in the ceiling. Around him stood nurses, carpenters, mothers, students, tired but listening. He said little, just enough. If they close the gates, we open another way. At dawn, the city changed rhythm. When you can't fight systems, fight with faith. When they take your resources, build with resolve. Because faith turns scarcity into testimony. The joy of the Lord is your strength. Nehemiah 8:10. What have you built with faith when the world gave you nothing? Comet, keep building if you're still standing by grace. Cement that cost too much was replaced with mixtures of clay and recycled rubble perfected by old builders. Bakers used charcoal ovens built from scrap metal, offering bread to the guards who kept night watch. Farmers arrived with baskets of maize, trading for repairs and shelter. Mechanics fixed trucks in exchange for grain. Money shrank, cooperation grew. The city transformed into an organism, every part feeding another. They built greenhouses on abandoned rooftops, turning gray towers into gardens. Rainwater collectors lined the streets, purified, filtered, distributed freely. Children learned to plant vegetables beside the classrooms that once were rubble. The same clouds that had drowned them now fed their survival. Money lost its tyranny. The people became the economy. Dawn breaks over the city, smoke still rising, but light piercing through. The workers, once scattered, now move in rhythm again. The sound of hammers returns, faint but alive. From a distance, the opposition watched in disbelief. They had planned famine. They witnessed fellowship. They had banked on despair. They saw invention. They grew furious. Media houses, owned by those who profited from despair, mocked them. Primitive, they scoffed. A clay city in a digital world. Yet images of fresh crops growing where nothing had lived went viral. Videos of neighbors sharing meals reached thousands. People outside the city began copying their model. But the stranglehold tightened again. Food convoys were hijacked. Gasoline ran out. Officials imposed new taxes, calling their self-sustaining system illegal. Still, the people refused to yield. Their unity had become their defense. Each night, Bill walked through the marketplace, now lit by solar lamps the youth had built from scrap. He saw a mother selling handmade soap beside a stall of school books printed on recycled paper. He saw a musician playing hymns to lift tired hearts. In their faces, he saw unity, fragile but real. He saw the miracle he had prayed for, a people who no longer waited to be saved. And he smiled. He knew then that the enemy's power was illusion. They could freeze accounts, but not compassion. They could raise prices, but not extinguish purpose. He began a campaign called Rebuild from Within. The slogan spread across every wall. Community radio told stories of survival. Testimonies rose. A widow who turned her small garden into a feeding center. A youth who repaired 20 bicycles and created transport for children. Faith became the new currency. Weeks later, a surprise arrived. Churches from neighboring cities, inspired by their courage, sent truckloads of grain. Doctors came with medicine. An architect offered free design software to the youth. The tide had turned again, not through wealth, but through witness. By the end of that month, the city's black market had collapsed. Those who had profited from chaos lost their grip. For every trick of greed, there rose a stronger act of generosity. And in the quiet of one dawn, as sunlight crawled across the rooftops, Bill stood on the highest platform overlooking the city. The wind carried the sound of hammers, laughter, and singing. He whispered, almost to himself. They thought the flood would drown us. They thought famine would starve us. But they forgot. Man does not live by bread alone. The wind carried his words through the waking city, mingling with the clang of hammers and the laughter of survivors. And as the sun climbed above the ruins, the first fruits of renewal shimmered in the light. Proof that faith, when pressed, multiplies. Halden watches from his high-rise window, realization dawning, his control slipping. The walls were not yet complete. The funds were still frozen. But hope had returned. Bill stands at the center of the site, sun lighting his face, wind tugging at his coat. His shadow stretches across the foundations, the symbol of something unbroken. The storm failed to drown them. The silence failed to bury them. And from their faith came a sound no power could mute, the sound of rebuilding. When faith refuses to bow, empires of greed begin to fall. For a brief moment, peace returned. The sound of hammers, laughter, and hymns replaced the silence of despair. Gardens blossomed on rooftops. The air, once thick with smoke and sewage, now carried the scent of rain and new soil. But in the halls of the powerful, unrest brewed. Those who had profited from ruin were losing their grip. Every brick lifted, every seed sown, every clean well dug, was a nail in the coffin of corruption. They could not defeat Bill with storms or starvation, so they turned to the oldest weapon of all, lies. It began as whispers, a news headline twisting his story, city project or corruption scheme. The money isn't real. The rebuilding is a scam. He's using donations for himself. Anonymous posts flooded social media, amplified by accounts with no faces, no names, only venom. Then came the billboards, huge, expensive, immaculate. Rebuilding is a fraud, don't be deceived. Everywhere he turned, there was a new accusation. Bribery, fraud, self-glorification. Even his faith was mocked. The preacher-builder who plays God. Influencers appeared on talk shows. Paid experts spoke of financial irregularities. News anchors smiled politely as they asked loaded questions. Who is this Bill, really? Where does his funding come from? Can we trust a man who refuses to show his personal accounts? And soon the people began to wonder. Doubt slithered into the city like a fog. Conversations slowed, volunteers hesitated, donations dropped. The enemies had found a new front, not against walls or hunger, but against faith itself. Bill watched it unfold in silence. He had fought storms. He had faced armed men. But now he fought shadows, unseen, ungraspable, and everywhere. He met with his closest workers in a small office built from repurposed wood. Their faces were tired, their eyes hollow from scrolling through slander. One young woman spoke with trembling voice. Sir, they say you bought land in the highlands. They say you're moving your family out of the city. He smiled faintly, weary but steady. Truth does not defend itself with words, he said. It shines through works. The next day, he called for transparency. Not as a press conference, but as a revelation. He unlocked every account, every donation, every expense, every brick purchased, every meal distributed, open for all to see. He displayed it in the main square, not in a meeting hall. Screens lit up across the plaza. Families gathered. The wind carried the hum of murmuring voices. There was no scandal to find. Every dollar had built something. Every promise had been kept. But Bill didn't stop there. He turned the spotlight outward, showing images of families in restored homes, children in reopened schools, clean water running through pipes that had been dry for decades. He never mentioned the accusers. He didn't need to. The truth was too radiant to compete with. My friend, maybe you've been lied about too. Maybe someone has tried to stain your name because they couldn't stop your purpose. Hear me. God doesn't need your PR. He needs your peace. Keep your integrity when everything else is stripped away, because time has a way of revealing truth that no defense ever could. If you stay faithful, your story will preach louder than your words. Your fruit will speak when your name is dragged through mud. And in the end, that's how God separates the builders from the breakers. The city began to stir again. Mothers posted pictures of their new gardens with the tag, "We're rebuilding." Teachers shared videos of their classrooms lit with handmade lamps. Doctors streamed from clinics once abandoned. What had begun as a smear became a movement. And for the first time, the world outside began to notice. Journalists from far-off nations came to see the miracle city. Reporters expecting chaos found order. Cynics expecting failure found faith. But the victory came with a cost. The attacks did not stop. They merely grew more desperate. Death threats appeared in Bill's inbox. Drones hovered over the construction sites at night. Rumors of assassination filled the air. Still, he walked openly among the people. He greeted the children. He broke bread with the widows. He prayed in the open square. And one evening, as he watched the sunset paint the rebuilt skyline gold, he said quietly, "They can twist my name, but they cannot twist what God has already done." The smear campaign had tried to fracture them. Instead, it bound them tighter. For truth, once proven in the light, becomes unbreakable. And though the shadows still whispered, the city kept building. Every hammer that struck echoed like an amen. By now, the city was rising again, taller, stronger, cleaner. But the true rebuilding wasn't in the skyline. It was in the people. Hearts once divided now beat in rhythm. Children played in streets once haunted by violence. And yet, even as peace returned, one last test waited. Not from enemies, but from within. Because sometimes the hardest battle is not against corruption or storms, but against fatigue, pride, and the temptation to quit when the finish line finally appears. The smear campaign had failed. The city, once crippled by corruption and confusion, now rose like a phoenix, radiant with purpose, stubborn in hope. Each sunrise revealed something new, a mural on a restored wall, children running through open markets, worship songs echoing from rebuilt churches. The light was returning, and with it, peace. But peace to the wicked is war. For those who had lost power, Bill's success was not just an inconvenience, it was an extinction. He had undone years of decay, exposed hidden profits, and revived the people's will to live clean. And so when all other attacks had failed, ridicule, sabotage, starvation, and lies, they chose the last, most ancient strategy. Eliminate the man. It began subtly. A letter arrived one morning, sealed in gold bearing the insignia of an International Development Council. Its message was flattering. We have observed your incredible work. The world needs leaders like you. We invite you to a closed-door summit in the neutral zone to discuss partnership, funding, and expansion. The committee claimed neutrality. They spoke of progress, innovation, and investment. They wanted Bill to share his vision before global investors. His advisors were ecstatic. Sir, this is the opportunity we've prayed for. Imagine, a city restored and supported internationally. You can secure the next generation. But Bill's eyes narrowed. He studied the seal, the phrasing, the excessive praise. Something felt too polished, too eager. He didn't reply immediately. That night, as he walked along the city's edge, where the lights dimmed and the land gave way to ruins, he felt the wind shift. It carried an unease, a whisper from beyond. He stopped beside a half-built tower, gazing toward the valley that lay between his city and the so-called neutral zone. Even from afar, he could see faint fires flickering, camps that had once been enemy strongholds. He whispered a prayer. Lord, give me discernment. Let me not mistake opportunity for temptation. Days later, a second letter arrived, then a third, each more urgent than the last. Why delay such goodwill? Surely you are not afraid to meet. Your refusal will be seen as arrogance. His close aides began to pressure him. Sir, even your allies are questioning why you won't go. People are starting to think you have something to hide. The strategy was working. The opposition was not using force. They were using reputation. They knew he valued the people's trust, and they dangled it before him like bait. But Bill was not naive. He gathered his team in the council hall, the same place they had faced storms, hunger, and betrayal. He laid the letters on the table and said quietly, These are not invitations. They are traps wrapped in diplomacy. The room fell silent. One of his aides frowned. Sir, that's a bold assumption. You have no proof. Bill leaned forward. Proof? My proof is history. Every time they failed to break the wall, they turned to breaking the man. He paused, his tone calm but unshakable. Tell them this. I am working. I cannot come down. But the enemy was relentless. A man arrived one evening, cloaked in urgency. He was known as Mark, a respected spiritual advisor, one who had long walked among prophets and priests. He requested a private meeting. Bill agreed. When he entered the small candlelit room, Mark's face was grave. My friend, he whispered, they are coming for you tonight. I've seen it. A vision. Men with knives, sent to end your life before dawn. Bill's jaw tightened. Are you certain? I swear it. You must flee. Hide yourself in the sanctuary. Lock the doors. Stay there until morning. It is the only safe place. The room was still. The candle flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. Bill's mind raced, not with fear, but with discernment. To hide out of fear would show cowardice to his people. He looked deeply into Mark's eyes and said, Should a man like me flee? Should I, who trust in the Almighty, hide behind doors when my calling is to stand before men? Mark hesitated, eyes darting. The mask slipped, just enough. Bill stepped closer. You've been paid, haven't you? They sent you to make me sin before the people, to destroy my credibility with my own faith." The silence said everything. Without another word, Bill turned and left. He returned to the city square, climbed the half-built stage, and called the workers together. "Listen to me," he said, voice firm but steady. "They will lie, they will threaten, they will even dress deceit in the robes of prophecy. But the God who began this work will finish it. Fear not the night, build even in the dark." And they did. Under the moonlight, the sound of hammers rang like war drums. Children carried lamps between builders. Women sang hymns as they passed buckets of mortar. At dawn, when the assassins crept through the shadows toward the city gates, they found torches burning bright, guards awake, workers still singing, walls still rising. The trap had failed. The invitation had been refused. The man had stood firm. When word reached the enemies, they grew silent. Not because they were defeated, but because they were afraid. They realized that Bill's strength was not in numbers, nor funding, nor popularity. It was in conviction, an unbreakable resolve forged in prayer and sealed by faith. And as the sun rose over the newly fortified gates, it illuminated a truth that every generation would remember. When you stand for righteousness, expect false invitations. When you refuse them, expect isolation. But when you endure, expect victory not by your might, but by the hand of God. The city was almost complete. The air carried a strange kind of silence. Not the silence of death, but the hush that comes before dawn. Cranes stood still like monuments of faith. Workers moved with slow reverence, aware that every brick now felt sacred. For months they had endured storms, hunger, slander, and fear. Now only one thing remained, the completion of the city gates, the final barrier between chaos and restoration. But something was different about Bill. He moved slower. He ate less. His body was weary, and his spirit was stretched thin. He had carried the burden of an entire people, and the weight had left its mark. One evening a worker asked, "Sir, when the city is finished, what will you do next?" Bill smiled faintly. "Rest, then rebuild the people inside it." He knew walls alone could not save a generation, only the truth within them could. But the enemy doesn't always attack from the outside. Sometimes he whispers, "You've done enough." Sometimes fatigue becomes the new temptation, the gentle voice saying, "Just stop now." Bill felt it. The exhaustion, the ache of giving, forgiving, leading, bleeding. He looked over the city lights, and for a brief moment, he wondered if his absence would even be noticed. Then he remembered, this was never about him. It was about the God who called him to build when no one believed rebuilding was possible. He rose again. He gathered the people and said, "We will finish this not because it's easy, but because it's holy." And they worked through the night. Hands blistered, eyes dim, but hearts aflame. At sunrise, the final gate was installed. The city was sealed, and when Bill stepped back, the view broke him open. What once was ruins now stood as testimony, not of his brilliance, but of God's faithfulness. My friend, maybe you're in that final stretch right now, not destroyed but drained. You're too close to quit, but too tired to continue. Hear this, when strength runs out, grace begins. It's okay to rest, but don't resign. Your story isn't ending, it's ripening. And soon, what looked like ashes will shine like glass under morning light. The last stretch always feels the hardest because the finish line is divine territory. That's where the enemy throws his last cards. Doubt, fatigue, distraction. Don't give him your surrender. You're closer than you think. The sun broke over the horizon, spilling gold across the city's skyline. The same skyline that months ago was nothing but ruins and ash. Now it gleamed. From the air, one could trace the once broken perimeter now healed by light. The city heights reborn. The walls stood tall, their steel frames reflecting morning fire. Roads once littered with decay now pulsed with life. Children heading to school, vendors opening stalls, buses painted with scriptures rolling down avenues that used to reek of despair. The rebuilding was complete. But Bill knew the true wall wasn't of concrete. It was of conviction. He stood on the highest terrace of the governor's tower, overlooking the city. For a long time he said nothing. The wind that brushed his coat was calm, not the storm that had once threatened to drown him, not the fire that had tried to consume him, but a whisper. A holy whisper. He closed his eyes and remembered. The first night when he walked alone through the broken streets, heart heavy with grief. The storm that tried to sweep away their hope. The betrayal that almost broke his trust. The letters, lies disguised as diplomacy, the poison of fear that almost crept into his soul. Every trial replayed in his mind like scenes of a long war. And yet, he was still standing. And whispered, he knelt. Lord, it is done. You kept your promise. When the city heard the announcement, the restoration was finished. Thousands gathered at the central square. The people came from every district, every background, every faith and fracture. Musicians tuned their instruments. The smell of new paint, new bread, and new beginnings filled the air. Children wearing white shirts and bright faces perched on walls. Elders clutched their canes. Journalists pointed cameras. Drones hovered like silent witnesses. The air was electric, thick with gratitude, disbelief, and awe. Bill stepped forward, his face weathered but luminous. He wore no armor, no regalia, only a simple coat and a pendant shaped like a flame. When he spoke, his voice was low, the kind that made silence listen. He began to pray. Lord, you saw us in our ashes and taught us to rise. You turned rubble into refuge, fear into faith. This city is yours, every brick, every breath. May it stand not as a monument to man, but as a reminder of mercy. Tears flowed freely across faces hardened by years of pain. Mothers hugged their sons. Fathers held daughters close. Even strangers clasped hands. Enemies turned neighbors. We began this journey in ruins. We faced storms, sabotage, and betrayal. Yet today we stand, not because we were strong, but because we were faithful. The crowd murmured, their eyes glistening. They said it couldn't be done. They said this city was too far gone, too corrupt, too broken. But I say this, no city is beyond redemption. No soul is too lost. No wall too ruined for God to rebuild. A roar rose from the crowd, not of pride but of praise. Not a rehearsed anthem, but a spontaneous roar of gratitude. The sound rose over rooftops, echoing through the city's heart. We are rebuilt! We are redeemed! As the people sang, Bill descended the stage and walked among them. He saw faces he once feared were lost. A child who had been rescued from drug rings, a mother who now ran a rehabilitation center, a young man who once sabotaged the work sites now guarding the gates. Every life was a stone in the true wall, and when he reached the gate of the old district, the one where he first saw the ruin, he stopped. There the elders had placed a plaque. Here once stood desolation, now stands testimony. He smiled, tears catching in the wind. But his peace was not without shadow. Though the enemies were quiet, their influence lingered. Whispers in high places, political envy, economic pressure. They waited for him to stumble, to tire, to fall into complacency. He knew the fight wasn't over. It had simply changed form. So that night, while the city celebrated, Bill slipped away from the banquet hall and climbed the old prayer tower. The stars were out, bright, unblinking sentinels above his head. He knelt again, just as he had in the beginning. Only this time his voice was softer, not desperate but grateful. Lord, you restored the city. Now restore our hearts. Teach us to guard what you've rebuilt, not with weapons but with wisdom. He stayed there until dawn, bathed in light, wrapped in stillness. When the sun rose, it crowned the city in gold, a living testament to the mercy of God. And so the legend of Bill, the builder in an age of ruins, became a parable whispered in generations to come. Parents told it to children. Teachers used it to spark courage in students. Pastors preached it as proof that leadership and faith could coexist in a corrupt world. It wasn't just about rebuilding a city, it was about rebuilding belief. I have raised him up in righteousness, and I will direct all his ways. He shall build my city, and he shall let go my captives, not for price nor reward, saith the Lord of hosts. Isaiah 45 verse 13. And to everyone watching this story, wherever you are, maybe your city lies in ruins. Maybe your family, your dream, or your faith feels beyond repair. Remember this. The God who helped Bill still rebuilds today. He can turn rubble into revival, ashes into integrity, ruin into redemption. Don't give up. Pick up your brick, your prayer, your purpose, your perseverance, and start again. Because when you rise, the darkness trembles. When you believe, heaven moves. And when you build, not for fame but for faith, you become the wall. And so the city rose. Bill did not stand above them. He sat among them, eating bread from the same pot, listening to the same songs. The people who were once broken were now whole. The city that was stolen was now restored. This is more than history. This is testimony. For in every life, in every family, in every nation, there are ruins. But God still restores. What was broken can live again. What was stolen can return. What seemed impossible can become testimony. So wherever you are watching from, rise, rebuild. Let your faith be stronger than storms, your hope brighter than enemies, and your courage deeper than betrayal. Thank you for journeying with us today on Heritage TV Modern Scrolls. If this story has lifted your heart, don't forget to subscribe, share, and like, so others too can be strengthened. Until next time, keep building, keep believing, for the cities of faith still rise.